I came to Austin because I needed to get away from my stepfather. Mom. Even now I can hear her, and she's mad at me for not telling the whole story. My real father died when I was 6 years old. The doctor said it was an aneurysm and he just fell at work. I remember him as a happy man, but I don't have many specific memories. I think he worked hard. I remember he gave me a toy guitar when I was about 4 years old, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Apparently, I played it all the time, driving them both crazy. For my 8th birthday, my mom finally got me a real guitar. It was a little 3/4-sized Yamaha, and I loved it. I remember giving her a big hug and tears came to her eyes when she told me that my dad would have loved to see me with it. When he died, my mom was devastated, of course, but my dad had planned ahead, so we were fine, at least financially, while she dealt with her grief. She worked as a secretary for a local realtor before he died, and afterward, she got her realtor's license. She loved it and was pretty good at it, so we were able to stay in the house. Life went on, just the two of us living together. I don't know where she met Rodney, call me Rod, Canton. I had just turned 12 years old when she sat me down at the table and asked me how I felt about her dating. We had been together for 6 years already, and of course I hated the idea. My mom just let me vent and then gently explained that she would never stop loving my dad, but she was lonely, etc. I didn't want to hear that, but I also felt bad that I had upset her with my pettiness, so I pretended I was fine with it. She and Rodney were married within a year. He wasn't a bad guy, at least at first, but he and I just didn't hit it off. I'm sure Mom was hoping I'd be a father figure to him, and maybe if I'd been younger when she remarried, it might have happened. He tried, I guess, but it didn't work out. I knew it was upsetting to my mother, but I just felt like he took something away from me. And then she was really taken away. When I was 14, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she died the day before I turned 15. To this day, birthdays are hard for me. Anyway, before she died, she made me promise that I would do well in school and not let her down. I wasn't going to. I had a 4.0 GPA. I think Rodney really loved my mother because he took it hard too. But with me, now that she was gone, he gave up trying. Over the next 3 years, he slowly turned into a beautiful man who slouched in his chair and laughed at me. Next chapter. My senior year of high school, I was about 5'10", 150 pounds, with acne, unruly dark brown hair, and blue eyes that I hid behind terrible glasses. I was a typical band fan, only my band practiced in my friend Carrie's garage instead of on the soccer field. Her mom was cool, and I got along with her pretty well. She was the closest thing to a mom, at least right now. I think Carrie understood that, but was cool about it too. I think we were birds of a feather, all 4 of us. I played guitar. Carrie Fisher was our vocalist and played keyboards. Jimmy Rogers played bass, and Floyd Jackson played drums. Josh loved to impersonate our manager, and we let him. He was hilarious, talking about the great gigs we were going to play as soon as some latest mystery deal he was working on was finalized. Carrie was probably my best friend, with Josh coming in a close second place. It was usually me and Carrie, but the 3 of us also hung out together frequently when we weren't killing some cover song in her garage. We were terrible, to put it bluntly. We never had gigs, but we had fun. Carrie was the same height as me, but weighed 10 pounds more than me. She wasn't acne-prone like me, and she had wavy blonde hair that was usually gathered into a severe ponytail and usually a day late for washing. She just couldn't be bothered. I didn't care. To my teenage eyes, she was beautiful, and I think I was in love with her forever. Besides, I loved her voice. If any of us could play any decent, her vocals could take us somewhere. I really wanted to impress her, so I tried really hard to play guitar. Thank goodness for YouTube, because good old stepdad sure didn't pay for lessons. I think I was pretty good at it. Well enough to be allowed to do music when I got an academic scholarship to UT. That's the University of Texas at Austin. Austin was very different from our small town outside of Rochester. We were lucky enough to live on the outskirts of a pretty good school district. Otherwise, I'd still be shoveling snow and dodging beer cans. Next chapter. But I'm getting ahead of myself. About halfway through our senior year, I finally worked up the courage, with Josh's help, to ask Carrie out. I stuttered most of the time and could barely look at her, but she replied, "Okay, Brendan, I'd like that." I had already reacted to the expected rejection, so when my idiot brain finally processed her words, I sort of said, "Huh?" The devil with the silver tongue is me. She laughed and replied, "I said I'm going with you, dummy. What, where, and when?" I blinked at her. Um, how about Fireside? It was a local burger joint. And then ice skating afterward? Friday? 6 o'clock? Are you asking or telling me, asshole? I blinked again. Come on, Brendan, it's me. Carrie. We've been friends since 5th grade? Hello? I finally shook my head. Yeah. Right, sorry. This whole conversation went completely differently in my head. I'm sure it did, she said dryly. Next chapter. I didn't have a car, so she drove. She picked me up in her mom's minivan. After hamburgers at Fireside, we headed to Mendon Park, thinking we could do some ice skating on the 100 Acres Pond. As we drove, Carrie finally asked me, "So why did you decide to ask me out, Bren? After all, we already spend most of our time together." Yeah, I know, Carrie. You're my best friend. I think I would have asked you out sooner if you hadn't been. I mean my friend. She looked at me, then returned her gaze to the road. I'll just lay it out like it is, okay? She nodded. I don't think I've told you before, but I've always thought you were beautiful, Carrie, even before I learned that girls come in all kinds. But there's more to it than that. You're smart, we get along great, and I love being around you. And when my mom died, it's like you became my surrogate family. So, not that I think of you as a sister or anything, because that would be weird, but Carrie reached out and took my hand. Bren, you're mumbling something. I swallowed and continued. Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, you know how my stepdad is now. And I think it was at the beginning of senior year that I finally realized I had to do something about it. I fell silent as we pulled into the park. Carrie turned off the engine and turned around in her seat to get a better look at me. I did the same. Carrie, I don't know what's going to happen next. I probably won't go to college unless a miracle happens. You're the only good thing in my life. I took a deep breath and let it slowly pull out of me. I always want to be your friend, but I realize that when we're together, I'm happy, and when you're not around, I wish you were. So I don't know. I guess I was hoping we could be more than that. Than friends, I mean. I looked at her, almost begging her to understand. She stared at me for a while. Finally, she shook her head and puckered the corner of her lips. What am I supposed to do with you, Bren? I grinned, but a little tentatively. I liked the hand-holding part, so that's what we did. We put on our skates and just held hands as we glided around the pond. We would look at each other when we thought the other wasn't looking, then catch each other and look away. We were funny, but in the best way. Slowly, we stopped in the middle of the pond, looking at each other. I reached out and took her hand in both palms and pulled her closer. My heart was pounding out of my chest. Damn it, she could probably hear it. So, who should lean in first? I'm not sure, I admitted nervously. Each half? She suggested, her eyes widening and searching mine. I nodded and leaned toward her. She leaned in too, and we met in the middle. We kissed, just pressed our lips against each other, and that was the end of it. For the rest of the year, we were inseparable. I mean, not that we hadn't been inseparable before, but now it was different. Carrie's mom noticed this and just looked at us with tenderness in her eyes. Next chapter. When it finally happened, it was awkward, innocent, and beautiful. I told her I loved her, and she responded that she loved me too. We still hung out, had band rehearsals, and generally acted like friends and lovers. But whatever it was, I think it made me cherish those moments and her even more. All I know is that I never wanted my senior year to end. Next chapter. Sure enough, it did end. But before it did, I got a letter. Or rather, I received several letters. But the biggest and most important one came from the University of Texas at Austin. Dear Mr. Barnes, congratulations. We are pleased to enroll you for the fall semester. And another letter from the Financial Aid Office awarding me an academic scholarship. I sat and stared at it, and then slowly rode my bike to Carrie's house. For a while, I just sat on the porch of her house until she noticed me. Hey, Bren, what are you doing here? Do you want to come in? I just looked at her and held out the letter to her. She came over and sat down next to me. I stared into space while she read. She gasped and said, Oh my God, Brendan, this is incredible. A full ride? She turned to me and gasped. What the hell are you crying? I hugged her frantically. No. She pushed me away to look at me. Bren, baby, what's wrong? I can't leave you, Carrie. I can't. Oh, Bren. She wrapped her arms around me and I buried my head in her shoulder. Yes, I was pathetic, but all I could think about was losing her. Because in my mind, being apart meant not being together. And not being together was the end of the world. I know it sounds stupid when I say it like that, but that's what was in my head. After what seemed like a long time of just holding each other, we eventually pulled away from each other. I had managed to stop crying, and Carrie looked like she had started at some point. But now, she had come to her senses too. Let's not think about it right now. Let's go inside. Mommy's going to be late tonight. And she took my hand and led me to her room. Next chapter. We did talk after all. I was smart, but not very wise. Carrie was just as smart, if not smarter, frankly. But thank goodness she had wisdom too. She argued that this was too big an opportunity to pass up, and why did I even apply if I wasn't going to go? I didn't have an answer to that, except that I was just thinking about getting away from my stepfather, and we were still just friends when I applied. I said it was just a pipe dream. I said I would go to SUNY Geneseo with her. I said a lot of stupid things. We went around in circles until finally she said, "Brendan, if you don't take this chance, you're going to regret it for the rest of your life. And in the end, you'll take that regret out on me." She was indeed a very wise person, and after much thought, I reluctantly came to the realization that she was right. So, in August, I packed my few belongings, and she drove me to the bus station. We hardly talked about anything. We had already talked enough in the days leading up to this moment. I just said, "I love you, Carrie, and I always will." I looked into her eyes as sincerely as I knew how. "That's a promise. No matter what, I love you forever." She smiled sadly. "I love you to infinity plus one." And I got on the bus. Next chapter. We did our best to stay in touch, but both of us were busy with our studies. I had no money to spare, and my house in Rochester was no longer available, so I couldn't come home for the vacations. Our conversations became more and more infrequent. I received beautiful Christmas and birthday cards and sent her the same. I talked to Josh occasionally as well, and a couple months into my sophomore year, he told me that she was casually dating him. But as far as he knew, it wasn't anything serious. It hurt, but I realized that we were 1,600 miles apart and living different lives. My life was in Texas, and hers was in Rochester. I made some good friends in Austin and played regularly in a local band throughout college. I also found a part-time job at a local construction company, and the boss, Jeff Mitchell, took a liking to me. When he found out I was studying business at UT, he told me to learn everything I could by working on a crew, and I think he was watching me very closely, or someone was reporting on me, because at the beginning of my senior year, he told me that if I wanted a job after college, it would be mine. "An office job," he said, laughing. I found a gym on campus and forced myself to work out in it. Exercise, outdoor work, and a better diet helped my skin clear up, and inexplicably I grew 6 inches during my junior year. Contacts helped too, and suddenly I had a lot more girls who seemed interested in me. I dated a few, but never got into a relationship with anyone. Eventually, I graduated with a bachelor's degree in business administration and a music major. I got a job at Mitchell Construction. One of the requirements Jeff insisted on was that all of his employees had to be bilingual. He hired local tutors, and they held classes right in the office. I also continued to work out at the gym, even going to one of the local boxing gyms where I sparred a little, but mostly just worked out. It went on like that for about a year. Work, random gigs, hanging out. I had a few friends, and I kept going on random dates. Then the company, were contacted about building a new complex in New Sweden, and my boss said I would accompany him to meet with the developer and realtor. It was a warm Tuesday afternoon when we all gathered in the developer's conference room. It was almost as nice as the one we had in our office. Bob, my boss, and I were there, and he introduced me to Frank Lewis, the developer, and his assistant, Sophia Pena. When I saw her, I was stunned. She was about 180 centimeters tall, with long black hair, dark eyes, and a flawless complexion. Perhaps I'm exaggerating a bit, but she was really striking. After I managed to close my mouth and murmur a greeting, Bob introduced the two realtors. Walt Jeffries shook my hand, but the second realtor just stared at me. He was Hispanic, 6 feet tall, and I think I remembered his name, Ray Gutierrez. After the meeting, I tried to catch up with Sophia, but I saw Ray open the door in front of her and keep his hand on her back. She turned around to say something to him and saw me, but I just headed the other way. Next chapter. A couple weeks later, Sophia called me to set up another appointment. I drove over and met her in her office. "Ray's not here?" I asked, apparently not as at ease as I thought I was. She smirked. "No, it's just about construction. He doesn't need to know." How much meaning she put into that last sentence. I just tried to focus on what she wanted to discuss. After the meeting, I asked, Sophia, before I make a fool of myself, is there anything going on with you and Ray? If you want, tell him it's none of my business, but I was thinking of asking you out for a drink, and I don't want to be turned down. I thought I was being smart. How wrong I was. She simply said, don't. It's not your business, and held the door for me. Wow, that was good. Fair enough, I said, and got up to leave. As I passed her, she put her hand on my shoulder. She gave me a sultry smile and asked, I thought you were going to ask me out for a drink. I looked at her perplexed. But I thought you just said... She stopped me. I said that what I do with Ray is none of your business. Then she smiled again. And what I do with you is none of his business. I thought for a moment. I'll tell you what, Sophia. Friday night I'm playing at Kathy Elder's, my friend Jason's bar. If you want, come by and maybe we can have a drink. I think I really surprised her with that. Oh, you're also a musician. A man of many talents. I laughed. It sounded pretty corny. I simply said, I'll have those details you asked for ready by the end of the day on Thursday, okay? And maybe I'll see you on Friday. Next chapter. We played a mix of new country and 70s Southern rock, and we had a decent crowd. Jason had a small dance floor and it was packed. I almost missed her, but I managed to see heads turn as she walked across the bar and settled on a high bar in one corner. She was wearing a short skirt and a sleeveless tank top as a concession to the warm evening, and had to maneuver a bit to get comfortable on the stool. Almost immediately, some frat boy approached her, clearly asking her to dance. She hopped down, and they moved to the dance floor. To her credit, the frat guy tried hard to get close to her, but she fought him off pretty handily. After the song, he wanted more, but she just shook her head and went back to her seat. Another guy tried to bring her a drink, but she just looked at him. No, dude. I hope that every girl knows that you should never take an open drink from a guy. She danced a lot, but never more than once with the same guy. I was sure she was drinking water from a bottle she'd gotten at the bar herself. She must have seen me on stage, but for some reason she didn't recognize me until the first break, so I headed over. Sure enough, there was another guy there. This one looked like a soccer player, who was trying to strike up a conversation with her. I just walked over, said, Hi, honey, sorry I'm late, and gave her a peck on the cheek. Who's your friend? I looked at the athlete. She hugged me, looked at him, and shrugged. We both just stared at him until he remembered something he forgot somewhere and walked away. We laughed. I wanted to move away from her, but she kept holding on. You promised me a drink, she smiled. So I promised. I took her by one arm. Come on, I want you to meet someone. We reached the bar and I shouted to Jason, Hey, you lazy bastard, is it really that hard to get a drink around here? Sophia looked at me wide-eyed, and I just winked at her. He walked over and looked at Sophia appraisingly. Sophia, this is my friend, and I use that term loosely, Jason. He owns this dump. Jason, this is Sophia. She looked around. I think this is a good place, Brendan. Jason smiled. You're drinking for free tonight, my dear. It's a pleasure to meet you. Let me know when you realize what an idiot this guy is. Oh, I've already realized, she smiled. Oops. Next chapter. We spent the rest of the break chatting and getting to know each other until I had to get back on stage. I have one more set, about 45 minutes. And then I'm done? If you want to stay, can we finish our conversation? She looked thoughtful. No, it's been fun, but I think I'll go home. But I wouldn't mind if we could do it again when you don't have to work. Wow, okay. I'm not going to lie. I was a little disappointed, but another date I enjoyed. Next chapter. Going out for drinks turned into dinner, which became once and then twice a week, which turned into dancing or movies on the weekends, which turned into spending time together on Saturday. After our second dinner, which was probably our fourth date if you count the night at Kathy Elder's, I walked her to the door and she turned to me, ran her fingers through my hair, and pulled my head to hers. The kiss continued until I had to exhale and she simply said, I don't want to grow old waiting for you to make a move. Maybe I'm slow, but I'm not. Okay. Maybe I'm also stupid. But I put my head down again, and we got to know each other a little better. A couple dates later, she invited me into the house. We spent some time cuddled up on the couch and things got pretty hot. I like you, Brendan, but I'm not sure I'm ready to take things any farther yet. Yet? I smiled. She grinned. You never know. Next chapter. Her idea of taking it slow lasted exactly one more date. She invited me into the house again, but this time we got tangled up right at the front door. After a while, we went to her bedroom and got down to it. Later, I took a shower, put on my pants, grabbed the rest of my clothes, and went back to her kitchen. She had made some toast and slid a plate over to me. Thanks. I chewed and drank, pondering. Sophia, I probably should have asked about this before we... I waved my hand in the direction of her bedroom, but I think I need to know. How do you envision it? Are we just having fun together? I mean, yeah, sure, but is that it? I reached out and took her hand. Or do you see this going somewhere? Brendan, I'm not sure what you want me to say right now. I nodded. Yeah, I get it, sorry. It was too much. Don't worry about it, okay? God, I was an idiot. So what do you have going on today? I'm going to church with my family, every Sunday. She smiled. Right. Okay, I guess I should get going, I said. Next chapter. Her family, her parents, Miguel and Luz, and her brothers Jaime and Hector, should have been surprised to see me, but were too polite to show it. For their part, I liked them almost immediately. It should be noted that when Sophia introduced me, two things happened. First, I heard her mother ask her father to invite me to dinner, and in Spanish. As I listened to her, I was distracted by something else, so I didn't have a chance to respond. Instead, her father translated the request, and I graciously agreed. The second thing that distracted me from her mother's invitation was that I thought I heard Jamie ask Hector, also in Spanish, "What about Ray?" Whereupon Sophia shushed him to shut up. It was then that I decided that I would just forget to tell Sophia that I could speak Spanish passably. I also decided that we needed to continue our morning discussion. Next chapter. With Sophia, things went on as usual. We continued to see each other and spend Sundays with her family. A few weeks later, I asked her again where she thought we were headed. We were lying in bed, and this time she smiled and snuggled closer. You make me happy, Brendan. Likewise, I said, kissing her. We continued like that for a minute, then I pulled away. Seriously, baby, do I make you happy when you like to spend time together? Or do I make you happy when I'm the only one for you? I saw something flicker across her face, but she replied, Only you, Brendan. I looked at her carefully. Sophia, that makes me happier than you can imagine. I'm sorry to ask, but I have to. I have to. If this upsets you, I'm sorry. But I have to ask. Does Ray know we're together? She sat up on the bed and stared at me. How can you ask me that? Please, Sophia, just answer the question. If we're not in an exclusive relationship, I deserve to know. Yes, Brendan, she hissed. I told him after we got into it. She spoke the word with a hiss. The first time. Okay? I flinched at the venom in her tone, but only said, Okay, thank you. She got out of bed and stomped into the bathroom, slamming the door. Next chapter. Things were a little chilly for a few days, but eventually she came to her senses. Flowers helped. Lots of flowers. After about a month, I hinted at moving in together, but she said her parents would be horrified, so I backed off. We continued to spend Sundays with them, and I really enjoyed getting to know them better. I genuinely respected her parents, and I liked her brothers. One fall, I took her with me to San Antonio one weekend. On a Saturday afternoon, we walked around Hemisphere Park. I took her to the top of the American Tower and got down on one knee. All I had time to say was, Sophia, you... Before she lowered herself with me and mumbled, Yes, yes, yes. Applause erupted. Later, after we had spent some time celebrating our engagement, she suddenly gasped. She sat up, the sheets bunching around her waist. Brendan, have you talked to my father? He'll kill you if you don't. I believe you, I said. But that's already taken care of, baby. He said if you're willing to put up with me, who is he to say no? She pounced on me, and the celebration continued. Next chapter. Since Miguel and Luz were the only daughters, the wedding went very well. Not ostentatious, but very nice. Jason was my best man, and Sophia's brothers were the groomsmen. Sophia's friends filled the roles of bridesmaids and bridesmaids. When I saw her walk down the aisle hand in hand with Miguel, I'm not going to lie, I thought I was allergic for a minute. In my situation, there was literally no one at the wedding except for Jeff and his wife Karen and a couple friends from the office. But Sophia had plenty of friends and family to fill the church. At the reception, we went around to everyone, and she translated for those relatives who weren't very confident in English. At one point, she whispered, Baby, you're going to have to learn Spanish if you want to maintain a relationship with this family. I smiled and replied, I guess you're right, but I love listening to you. It's so intimate, I guess. When you whisper in my ear what they're talking about. I felt a little guilty as I continued to pretend. She smiled back and bit down. In this year? Ouch. Next chapter. The next couple years were great. After we finished a project we were working on together, we both moved on to other jobs. I was promoted after that, and I think Jeff gained confidence in his abilities. I missed working with Sophia, but otherwise it was pretty much the same as it had been before we got married. Dinners, dances, occasional concerts, and Sundays with her family. We talked about starting a family. In fact, I brought it up a couple times and she kept putting it off. Eventually, she got mad at me and said she hadn't reached the point in her career where she was ready for children yet. I wanted her to be happy, so I backed off and things calmed down. That was until Sophia was assigned to another development in Bluff Springs. She started working late one night a week, then two. When she told me she had to work Saturdays, I'd had enough. Honey, what kind of work is that? You've never had to work so many hours before. I know, baby. It's just that this job is hard. There's still a lot of red tape. It's working out. I should be able to get back to a normal schedule soon. Only she didn't. Next chapter. In the years before and after we were married, Mitchell Construction was doing pretty well. Jeff decided to throw a big party to honor the company, as well as some of the businesses we had partnered with and contributed to our success. Our largest room had more space than we could fit in, so we rented, where else, Kathy Elder's house. Sophia and I socialized and danced, mostly with each other, but occasionally with others. I danced with Jeff's wife and a few other ladies, and Sophia danced with Jeff and a few men from her office who were polite enough to check with me first. At one point, I was talking to Ralph Hughes, one of our foremen, when I noticed Sophia dancing with Ray. They were dancing pretty close together, and I saw Ray's hand move down to her ass. When she didn't immediately remove it, I asked Ralph if he could excuse me. I walked over to Sophia and she smiled when she saw me. She said something to Ray that I couldn't hear and continued dancing. I waited until she walked over to me. It's getting pretty cozy, Sophia, I said emphatically. It's just Ray. We were just dancing. What are you, jealous? She smirked. She'd had a couple cocktails and had obviously missed a few warning signs. Do I have a reason to? My tone became even more strained. I mean, do you usually let just Ray grab you in public? Screw you, Brendan. I told you we're just dancing. I stared at her, flabbergasted. Nah. She realized what she had said and tried to grab my hand. Brendan, I'm really sorry. I think I've had too much to drink. Obviously, I'm going to go get some air. Brendan, wait, she called out to me, but I just walked away. I noticed she didn't try to follow me. I walked over to the bar. Jason walked over and raised an eyebrow. Just mineral water, bro. I sat there, sipping and staring into space. Then I heard Jason say, Dude, and he looked toward the stage. I followed his gaze and saw Sophia disappear out the back of the stage door. What the hell? I headed that way. Jason stopped me and jabbed a thumb over his shoulder in the direction of his office. I nodded and went in. Next chapter. I turned off the light in his office and swung the door open to the hallway. I saw Sophia and Ray leaning against the wall across from each other. They were speaking in Spanish, but I managed to catch most of the conversation. Sophia said, Brandon is very angry. You shouldn't have grabbed my ass, Ray. Ray only smirked. Screw him. It's my ass and I'll grab it if I want to. She pointed her finger at him and said, No, it's my ass. And I told you can't do that shit in public, especially when he's around. What the hell? Am I supposed to just wait? She coquettishly replied, Don't I always give you what you want? You just have to be patient. We just have to be careful. Yeah, but that's what makes it all the more poignant, knowing that he's probably sitting outside crying because he thinks you're mad at him, Ray said in a mocking tone. We can knock one out right here. Just turn around. Sophia looked around the hallway and said, Okay, just quickly. She turned and Ray moved toward her. Just then, I stepped through the door and cleared my throat. Sophia jumped up and let out a thin scream. Ray stared at me. Hey guys, I missed you at the party. I took a couple steps towards them. So what are you doing? Hiding out here? I took a couple more steps. Sophia looked pale, but she simply replied, Oh, we were talking about the project, It was too noisy in there. Wow, such dedicated professionals doing work at a party. Impressive. I patted them slowly. Brendan, why are you acting like that? Sophia was definitely nervous. She wasn't sure what I'd seen. Oh, I don't know. Maybe. And I switched to Spanish. Because my wife was just about to sleep with this piece of shit right in this hallway. And it's pretty obvious it's been going on for a while. That's why I'm acting like this. It didn't immediately occur to me that I no longer spoke English, but when it did, Sophia covered her mouth with her hands and sank to the floor. Yes, I heard your entire conversation. Very informative, Sophia cried, and I just looked at Ray. So, what are you going to do? It didn't take much more than that. Ray took a swing at me. I was going to let him make the first move so I could defend myself later with a clear conscience. As I walked through Jason's office, I took a stack of quarters from the coin pouch in his office. You know, those heavy zippered bags that small businessmen use to carry their silver to and from the bank. So, I clutched them in my fist, and when he telegraphed a big looping right jab, I ducked and hit him with my left right under his ear, and he went down like a sack of wet shit. That's what he was, as far as I could tell. Sophia screamed and knelt down next to him. Don't worry about me, Sophia. Your husband, I'm fine. I think you made your choice. And I walked out the same way I'd come in, dropping the roll back where I'd picked it up. Brendan, wait, she called out. I just walked back to the office, nodded to Jason, and headed for the car. Sophia followed at my heels. She babbled that things weren't what I thought they were, that nothing was going on, that she loved me, and that please I should stop and talk to her. Eventually, I just stopped her. I looked at her and said, Honey, do you know what a white lie is? What? I don't. A white lie is when I tell you that this dress doesn't make you look fat. She stared at me. A white lie is different from a big lie. A big lie is like when I tell you I don't speak Spanish. Her eyes widened, and I swear I saw her skin turn 3 shades lighter, and she started wobbling on her feet. You son of a bitch, she hissed. Mine. Oh, sorry, that was French. You were entertaining, I heard. And you were going to let him entertain you right here and I'm the son of a bitch? I shook my head. No, 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 no. She shook her head, pleading with her eyes. Baby, it's not what you think. I laughed. Really? It only happened once. Bullshit! He means nothing to me. She almost shouted. For God's sake, Sophia, how much longer are you going to give me trite excuses? She began to sob. Please, Brendan, I'm sorry. I love you, please. I see. You love me so much that you were going to entertain Ray at our company party? She continued to sob. Never mind, Sophia. I've had enough of this. I'm leaving for the hotel tonight. You have until next weekend to get your shit out of my house. No, Brendan, my life! You can't leave me! She wailed. I'm your life? She nodded. Yes, baby. You've got to be kidding me. If I'm your life, tell me why. I looked straight into her tear-drenched face. This is your only chance. Tell me why, and convince me that I should forgive you. But if I smell one more whiff of shit, I'm done. She snorted. Can we go home and talk? She wasn't stupid. She needed time to come up with something I'd believe, but at that moment I didn't care. I certainly didn't want to be at the party anymore. You know what? Okay. Come on. You have until we get home to come up with a good story. We drove home in dead silence. When we arrived, Sophia immediately headed to the bathroom, no doubt biding her time. I heard the shower turn on. Suddenly angry, I went to open the bathroom door. Finding it locked, I kicked it open. She shrieked and turned around to look at me. Oh no! You're not going to wash that bastard off of you and then come talk to me. Get your ass in the kitchen. She stared at me. How can you talk to me like that? You're kidding, right? I threw a robe over her, a large terry cloth one, not silk, and waited. Continuing to flash her eyes, she put on the robe and went into the kitchen. I sat down across from her and waited. The floor is all yours. She continued to stare at her hands, which wriggled in her lap like 2 little animals. I started to get up. Okay, Sophia, if that's the best you can do? No. She held out her hands to me, spreading her fingers wide, and I sat back down. No, please. Her face was twisted and she looked very unhappy. I felt about the same way. I'm so sorry, Brendan. I just looked at her. You've already said that. But while we're on the subject, what are you sorry for? For cheating? Or for getting caught? She stared at me dumbly. Whatever. But it's starting to smell in here, Sophia, so make it good. I never meant to hurt you, baby, I swear. I promise it will never happen again. I just started laughing. I mentally pictured Sophia diligently writing out reasons from a long checklist in the large hardcover of the Cheater's Handbook, and I couldn't stop myself from laughing. Sophia just looked confused. I slowly leaned over, put my hands on the table, and lowered my head. My shoulders continued to shake, and I wasn't sure if I was laughing or crying. I felt rather than saw Sophia tentatively reach out to touch my shoulder. I recoiled, and she recoiled. Please don't touch me. I sat up and wiped my face with my palms. I'm so sorry, you have to believe me. Just give me a chance and I know we can get through this, Brendan. I love you, she cried. I sighed and shook my head. I love you too, and that's why it hurts so much. But I gave you a chance, Sophia. We gave each other a chance. When we made our vows to each other in front of your entire divine family, she leaned back in her chair. I tried to pull myself together. Remember, Sophia, I take you as my faithful partners? Remember how you said that? She snorted and nodded. Good! I slammed my palms on the table and she jumped up again. I got up and headed for the bedroom, Sophia following at my heels. She started grabbing at me as I grabbed my bag from the closet and started stuffing clothes into it. She followed me into the bathroom, still crying as I grabbed a razor, toothbrush, and other toiletries. I headed for the door. Before I opened it, I turned around to her. Next weekend, Sophia. I bought this house before I met you, and I plan on keeping it. Get your shit cleaned up by next weekend, and get a lawyer. I'm still not sure if she really fainted or faked it, but I didn't really care. I left her there, lying on the floor. Next chapter. The next day passed in trips to the lawyer, to the bank, to the HR and finance department of the company, and to my boss. I didn't want to ruin Sophia, and I didn't want to pay alimony if I could avoid it, so I asked the lawyer to file for an amicable divorce. I split the bank accounts and transferred my half to separate accounts. I removed her name from all other accounts and policies. It was one of the hardest days of my life, but the next day was even worse. I put on a suit and went to visit Sophia's parents. Eventually, the lawyers worked things out. Sophia asked for a chance to talk to me before we signed any papers, and I just wanted to move on with my life, so I agreed. She wanted to meet me at the house, but I said no way in hell. I would meet her at her attorney's office and we could talk there. When I arrived, she was already there. She looked amazing, as she always did. She smiled uncertainly, stood up and tried to hug me, but I just walked around the table and sat across from her. Okay, Sophia, let's talk. She looked at me, then lowered her eyes. Brendan, I'm so sorry. I love you. You have to believe me. I do believe you, Sophia. That's why it still hurts so much. I asked, can you please explain why? Did you really end your relationship with him? Yes, I did. I swear I did, Brandon. When you first asked me if we were going to date, I had already ended things with him. Okay. So what the hell happened? I don't know. I guess when I was transferred to a new project, we worked with the realtor Ray worked for. Wait. You didn't see fit to tell me you were working with Ray again? You're not helping your case. I'm sorry, Brendan. I didn't think it was important. Exactly, Sophia, and that's another part of the problem, I said sadly. But please continue. She looked at me. She really didn't understand why this little revelation upset me. But she continued. I was with him for a long time before I met you, Brendan, and I don't know if he was easy to talk to. We did have to work all those extra hours at first. It was just, one time we worked late into the night, but we still had some things to sort out, and he said we should have a working dinner. I didn't think it would be anything special. I had a couple glasses of wine, maybe even more than a couple, and he started stroking my shoulders. I know I should have stopped him, but I was a little drunk and told myself it was just harmless. Tears rolled down her cheeks. When it was over, I realized what I had done and I was disgusted with myself and horrified. I screamed at him and ran out the door. The next day I couldn't look at you. I just knew you would look and realize what I had done. But you didn't, she cried. Why should I, Sophia? I trusted you. And who knows, maybe if you had confessed right then, you would have explained what had happened. Not that drunkenness was an excuse, but maybe we could have talked and settled things. I couldn't. I was so embarrassed, I couldn't tell you. I just nodded. But even then you didn't stop, did you? Fresh tears were streaming down her face and she just nodded. I know it sounds so stupid when I say it now, but I never meant to hurt you. It only happened a few times. Please, Brendan, can you give me another chance? I'll do anything. I looked at her and my heart broke all over again. Sophia, I really do love you, but I just don't think I can trust you again. Every time you had to stay late at work, I doubted if you were really in the office. If I called your phone and you didn't answer, I wondered who you were with. And that's no reason to be in a relationship. You'd start resenting me, and then where would we be? She shook her head. No, 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 we can get past this, please. I'm so sorry, Sophia. Please just sign the papers. I walked out of the office, her sobs echoing in my head. Next chapter. As much as I wanted to punish Ray one more time for what he did to us, it turned out I didn't need to. I found out from Jamie that Ray was in the emergency room with multiple bruises, a broken arm, a broken nose, and a concussion. Apparently, he'd fallen down the stairs. I suggested he and Hector get together and have a drink on me. We drank to Ray's misfortune, and I paid no attention to the scratches on both guys' knuckles. Sophia tried calling me a few times, and eventually I blocked her number. A couple months later, I found out she had moved in with Ray, and that was the final nail in the coffin lid. Shortly after that, Hector told me that Sophia had caught Ray cheating on her with his bloody cousin. That was impossible to make up. I laughed and asked the guys out for drinks again. I think she left after that. Next chapter. I've never been much of a drinker and never felt the need to get into a bottle. Well, except for the day I saw her for the last time. Instead, I immersed myself in work. Eventually, Jeff understood me and ordered me to take 2 weeks off. Brendan, you're going to burn out. Go have a couple beers, go fishing, have fun. Just get everything out of your head for a while, son, okay? Women, or romantic relationships anyway, were the last thing on my mind, so I didn't get laid. But I did go to Lake Travis and drown some worms. 2 weeks later, I returned to work with sunburns, and at least the beginnings of a new outlook on life. Jason and I conferred, and like a true friend, he told me I'd be better off without that crazy bitch. I continued to perform there on weekends, but I still wasn't ready to get back in the saddle, even though I had several opportunities. I tried to be kind, and for the most part they understood me, and let me know that the offer was still open if I wanted to take advantage of it. This improved my mood a bit. For some reason, Jason set up a karaoke machine, and Thursday nights became official karaoke nights at Kathy Elder's. Surprisingly, it was quite popular, and I started showing up to catch the action. Next chapter. One Thursday, about 6 months after I last saw Sophia, I was sitting at the bar when I heard feedback howls from the stage. I flinched, as did half the bar, and then as if out of nothingness, I heard a voice say, "Sorry about that. Hey everyone, I just wanted to sing a little song about how I'm trying to decide where to go next. Something I've had to do recently. Hope you guys like it." I heard a guitar intro and then a voice started singing, "Heads Are Carolina, Tails Are California" by Joe D. Messina. I was afraid to turn around. I used my reflection in the bar mirror to do some recon, and I couldn't believe what I saw. I recognized her voice immediately. Seeing her now, I saw the same wavy blonde hair. She had gotten rid of her acne and lost about 35 pounds, but she looked like the same beautiful girl I knew in high school. And then a crazy idea hit me. I rushed to my truck and grabbed my guitar case. Without raising my head, I headed straight for the bar. "Jason," I whispered. He walked over. "Yeah, Brendan, what's up with the guitar?" "No time. I need to go backstage. Can I use your office?" "Sure, no problem. But what?" "No time," repeated I. "Just turn down the karaoke volume when I tell you to, okay?" He looked even more puzzled, but I had already sprinted out the office door. I ran to the stage door and pulled out my guitar. I quickly checked the tune, close enough, then quietly opened the door and stuck my head out. She had her back to me, so I walked onto the stage and sat on a stool behind her. I made a turn-down gesture to Jason and started playing. The singer looked up in surprise as the music quieted and my guitar started playing. She started to turn around. I lowered my head, making another "go ahead" gesture. Practicing sign language was really paying off today. She looked a little puzzled, a little confused, but continued singing, occasionally glancing at me. She finished her performance to great applause. As I said, I had performed there before, and I think some people recognized me. Besides, she was still very good. Anyway, she turned and looked at me again, folding her hands on her hips, with a puzzled half-smile on her face. I stood up and looked up. "Hi, Carrie," I said. Her eyes widened and her mouth opened in a surprised, "Oh." She covered it with her hands for a second and then ran up and hugged me. I just held her against me while the audience applauded and a few whistles blew. "Another one?" I winked. She made it look like she didn't want to let me go, but she nodded. "Remember this one?" And I moved on to Jamie Lawson's "I Wasn't Expecting That." She laughed out loud and started singing again, this time looking at me instead of the audience. Afterward, I hugged her again and held her hand up as the audience applauded. She smiled at them and me and made a timid curtsy. I led her over to an empty table that Jason had thoughtfully set aside for us. Her girlfriends came over and she introduced us to each other. They asked if she was okay, and she said she was. They asked if she wanted them to stay, and she said she could give her a ride, while looking at me. I nodded and said I would take care of her. One of them smirked and said she was sure she would. Back at the table, she did look up at me, and I think she realized that now she had to look up at me. My God, Bren, when did you manage to get so tall? I only grinned. I've been working hard at construction and eating better. But look at you. You look fantastic, Carrie. She blushed. Thanks. I've got about the same story. Started exercising and stopped eating hamburgers and fries. You finally got a haircut, I see. I chuckled. Yep. No more hair. I awkwardly ran my fingers through my hair. Carrie smiled. I liked your hair. She stuck out her bottom lip and I giggled again. We sat in silence for a few seconds before I said, Not that I'm not thrilled to meet you, but why are you here? Don't get me wrong. I'm happy you're here. You have no idea how much, I added. I'm sorry. Too much? Too soon? I smiled. No, it's okay, she said, lowering her gaze. Honesty, right? Best policy, I said sincerely. Okay. Well, shit. I still can't believe I'm sitting here talking to you. So, I'm sorry why I'm here. She sighed. I think it was at the end of freshman year when we started drifting apart, and you said you couldn't come home for the summer. She saw the sadness on my face and hurried to continue. Don't blame yourself, Bren. I understand how you felt, I promise. It's just, back then, at the time, you know? I was just in shock. I nodded. Me too, Carrie. Anyway, that's when I started paying more attention to myself. It didn't matter with you, remember? You thought I was beautiful from the beginning. She said it softly, almost surprised. I remember, I smiled. And I still remember. She blushed again. So, I started losing weight. My face cleared up, and suddenly guys were interested in me. In my sophomore year, guys started asking me out on dates. At first I was mad. Like, where were you before, you know what I mean? I know exactly what you mean, honey. She looked at me, smiling affectionately, and replied, Yeah, I guess so. So, I started dating a little, then a little more. I guess I went a little boy crazy. She hastened to add, I didn't sleep around. I just went out a lot. But to be honest, I got bored of it quickly. I graduated from Geneseo with a degree in communications and went to work for WROC. Wow, that's so cool, I exclaimed. It is, actually, she smiled. I got a job as a production assistant. I think I worked there for about 2 years and then they hired a new program director. She lowered her eyes. We kind of hit it off. I flinched slightly, hoping she hadn't noticed. What's his name? Carrie got a strange look on her face, flashed a half smile and was gone. Barry? I goggled at her. Then I started giggling. Carrie giggled too, and I couldn't help it. Maybe it was just seeing her like this again, all these emotions, but I started laughing out loud. Carrie and Barry? Oh my God! Shut up! She was still giggling. It's not that funny. My laughter slowly subsided and I wiped my eyes. No, I guess it's not. Sorry. We both sat back down in our seats. So, where's Barry? I chuckled again, but it faded quickly when I saw her face. Still in Rochester. We dated for a little over a year, then we got engaged, and then I found out what a bastard he was. Wait, I said. Turning in my seat, I waved my hand at Jason, held up 2 fingers and pointed at the table. He nodded. I'm sorry, but this sounds like a conversation we need a drink for. A moment later, Jason found himself at the table with 2 glasses of Whistle Pig Rye. Whiskey from Vermont in a Texas bar might seem unusual, but Jason had stocked it just for me. A little something close to home. Thanks, Jason. Meet my friend Carrie, who lives at our house. Carrie, this rascal is my friend Jason. He owns this dive. He ignored me. Nice to meet you, he said to Carrie, and she smiled at him. Then he waved me off and headed back to the bar. Carrie took a small sip and gasped. Wow, Bren, this isn't going to be just a taste. I smiled and took a sip. I've missed it, you know. Bren, you're the only one who ever called me that. She looked down, a small smile playing on her lips. Then she took another sip and continued. Anyway, the wedding was about 6 months away, and one day he forgot his cell phone. So trivial, right? I looked at it, and the stupid asshole hadn't even bothered to delete his messages. With 2 of my friends. She shook her head and took another drink. I waved to Jason again. He walked over, calmly set the bottle down, and walked away. When I confronted him, he hit me. I growled, Son of a bitch. I think I'll make it to Rochester in 2 days, and when I do, I'll kick that bastard's ass. I actually started to get out of the stall. She reached out and grabbed my arm. Bren, stop! You're not going to Rochester. Why not? No one's going to hurt you. I'll teach him wrong. She giggled, and I raised an eyebrow. Already taught him. I raised a second eyebrow. Yep. Kicked him right in the balls and kept kicking him until my neighbor heard the noise and pulled me off him. I broke 2 of his ribs and ruptured 1 testicle, she said proudly. I goggled at her. Oh shit, Carrie. She giggled, then got serious again. So, after that, I just didn't feel like I could stay in Rochester anymore. I was angry at my friends and didn't know which of them I could trust, if any. And then Barry set me up at the station. They said if I quit, they'd give me a reference. Otherwise, they'd fire me. I guess I could have fought it, but I'd already made the decision to quit, so why bother? She finished her drink, and I poured another on my finger. I think I had a convert. She nodded her thanks and swirled the liquor in her glass. Finally, she said, the only person, well, besides Mom and maybe Josh, that I trust is you, Bren. I know I have no right to expect anything, but I thought, well, I needed to get away, and why not go somewhere where I knew I had at least one friend? So, you live here now? She nodded. I felt a goofy grin appear on my face. That's the best news I've gotten in a long time, Carrie. A very long time. Her cheeks turned slightly pink, but it could have been the whiskey. Thanks for offering to beat him up. I know you would have. I waved her off. How long have you been here? About 4 months. I got a job at KXN and found an apartment. I kept telling myself I wanted to get back on my feet and then I'd try to find you. But honestly, I think I was nervous. After all, I was almost married. What if you had met someone? I was afraid, Bren. It's been 8 years. I cleared my throat. I guess everything happens for a reason. If you'd gotten here 6 months ago, I would have been. Married, I mean. Her eyes widened, and I reached out to take her hand. It's over, I promise. It's over. Burned to the ground. Wow, that sounds like a story. I nodded and continued to tell her chapter and verse about my life with Sophia. When I was done, she simply said, God, what a selfish bitch. Quite. For a few moments, we sat in silence. Looking back, I don't know if I truly loved her, at least not the way I love you. Do you still love me? She asked in a thin voice. Carrie, do you remember what I said before I got on the bus? You said you loved me forever, she whispered, and that I would always love you. And I took her hand. Part 2. Sophia. My name is Sophia Pena. Sophia Pena Barnes is what it says on my wedding certificate. I still have it. I'm divorced, but I haven't given up his name. It's the only thing I have left of him. I threw away the most wonderful man I ever knew because I was a fool. It's been 5 years, 3 months and 14 days since I last saw him. I wish I had tried everything I could to get him back. But the way I left him, the way I hurt him, I don't think he will ever want me again. I cheated on him, and after Brendan left, I couldn't stand the person I had turned into anymore and ended up leaving. I didn't fight the divorce and he found someone else. I was heartbroken, but I couldn't hate her. She made my Brendan happy. He still kept in touch with my parents, and they still treated him like a son. It was from my mom that I found out about his new wife, and a few years later, their baby. I was honest with them when I told them why we divorced. Mom and Dad were so disappointed in me. It took a while, but eventually they forgave me. I hope that someday Brendan can too. But after what I did, the way I did it, I'm scared. I ask Mom and Dad how he is when I come to visit. I think I'm being clever, just blabbing on and on to make conversation. But I think they know I still love him. Dad was the one who convinced me that I needed to talk to someone who would help me understand why I did what I did, and when I understood how to deal with the guilt. I was drinking too much, and my dad said I would die if I didn't get help. I promised him and helped him. It took a few tries, but I found someone I liked, and she helped me a lot. But I still have a long way to go. Then Dad got sick. I came home, driving 90 minutes from Waco as often as I could. Yes, I ran away from my life in Austin, but I didn't run far. So brave. Ha! I told myself I was coming home to my dad and mom, but that wasn't the whole truth. And I needed to be honest with myself first and foremost if I wanted to be honest with him if and when I got the chance. So, honesty? I came because I was scared. Again. Dad had been my rock since I was a little girl, and I was so afraid of losing him. Mom was strong. She hugged me when I cried and told me that Daddy, even though he was gone, would always watch over me and my brothers. One night, when Daddy was already asleep, Mommy said, "Mia, I know you still love him." Of course, I burst into tears. "Oh, Mommy, if you only knew how much. And I'm so sorry for what I did to him. And to you. Brendan loves you and Daddy. We love him too. He'll always be like a son to us. His Carrie was a beautiful soul, and little Lark is just a treasure. She calls me abuela, you know. It was Brendan's idea, not mine." She patted my hand. "So, Maria, what's your plan?" "Plan?" "Sophia, I'm your mother. I know you still love him and want him back. I'm asking you how you plan to accomplish that." "I don't know, Mom. I think I hurt him too much." I started crying again. "Then you need to show him that you will never hurt him again." "How do I do that?" My voice trembled. "Slowly, Magia. Slowly. Don't worry. I'll help you." Next chapter. Brendan. The caller ID said, Luz Pena. "Hi, Mom. How can I help you today?" She smiled. "Hi, Brendan." I almost dropped the phone. Even after 5 years, I recognized her voice. "Brendan?" "Yeah, sorry." "Hi, Sophia." "I'm sorry to bother you, but my mom asked me to call you." "Why, what's going on? What do you need?" I immediately regretted the harshness of my tone. Very quietly. "Dad's sick, Brendan. He was too proud for you to see him in that condition. But now, well, it's getting close, and he'd like to see you. Could you come over?" "Oh, God, of course. Just tell me where." "He's at home. We've been on hospice for the last few days." My heart dropped. Hospice. I simply said, "I'll be there as soon as I can." I told Lark we were going to visit Abuela, and she said, "Yay." I secured her in the car seat and headed toward the house. As I carried her into the house, I saw Hector and Jaime sitting in the kitchen. I walked over to them and gave them a hug. "I'm so sorry, guys. I wish I had known about this sooner." They just nodded. Hector said, "You know, Dad, he hates to look weak in front of anyone, even family. And you're still our brother, you know?" I nodded and hugged them both again. "Lark, Poopsie, stay with Tio Jaime and Tio Hector for a minute." She ran up, and Jaime picked her up in his arms, and I headed to Miguel's room. I knocked and slowly opened the door. 3 eyes looked at me. Miguel tried to raise himself a little on the bed, and Luz just smiled at me. She sat next to him, holding his hand. And the third person I hadn't seen in almost 5 years. Her hair was cut shorter than before, and she was thinner than I remembered. But otherwise, she was as beautiful as ever. My ex-wife, Miguel's daughter, Sophia. She sat in another chair in the room, her eyes fixed on mine, tears welling up in them. She stood up, took a step toward me, and stopped. My heart clenched. After all, her father was lying there dying. I just held out my arms, and she rushed to me, wrapped her arms around me, and sobbed to her heart's content. I just put my arms around her. "Shh, I'm here. I've got you." Eventually, her crying subsided. With one last snort, she pulled her head away from my chest and looked at me. "I ruined your shirt," she tried to laugh. "Don't worry about it," I smiled, letting her go. She returned to her chair, and I turned to the man on the bed and the woman next to him. These are the closest people I've had since my mom died years ago. I walked over and hugged Luz, and she responded to my hug with a strength that belied her years. She stroked my cheek and said, "Talk to him, mijo." She took Sophia's hand and they left the room. I sat down next to him. "How are you doing, Miguel?" "Not bad. I think I'm going fishing tomorrow." I laughed, he chuckled, and then coughed. I handed him the glass that was on the nightstand, and he took a sip. "Thanks, mijo." He gave me a hard look. "I mean it. You were like a son to us even after my daughter lost her Maldite mind. And Lark is the grandson we were so hoping for. Thank you for letting us be a part of her life." "Of course. You and Luz will always be her kin." He coughed again. "Listen to me, Brendan. I'm dying, so you have to." I tried to protest, but he waved me away. "Listen," he repeated. "This is my dying wish for you." He took my hand and said, "Please let me say it and don't interrupt, okay?" I nodded. He thought for a moment and then spoke. "Brendan, Luz and I were ashamed and disgusted at what Sophia did to you. I was ashamed because how could the daughter I raised act like that? I failed her, and I failed you. For that, I'm sorry." I tried to protest again. I had no idea. But he held up his hand. "No interruptions. I'm sorry." He looked at me. "I know she broke your heart. But I know my daughter, and even when she acted like a mamada child, I saw that she broke her own heart too. I know." He looked at me intently. and I felt the strength of his will despite the sickness eating away at him. I know she still loves you, and I've watched her for the last 5 years. She's not the silly girl she used to be. I'm asking you, please, as her father, talk to her. Even if there's nothing left between you, please take care of her. She'll need you when I'm gone. I was already openly crying. But what could I say? I bent down to hug the man I considered my father. I promise, Dad. Tears stood in his eyes. Thank you, mijo. Now please send my daughter. Next chapter. Miguel held out for 2 more days. Sophia called me in hysterics. I went to pick her up to get her out of the house and took Lark with me. It was a trick, but it worked. My daughter is a naturally cheerful child, plus having a 3-year-old around couldn't help but be distracting. We went to the park and watched Lark while she played. We didn't talk about much, just chatted about her work in Waco or how things were going for me, in between exclaiming about everything Lark did or brought for us to see. When Lark started to fall asleep, I told Sophia that it was probably time for me to take her home. She lowered her eyes and clasped her hands in her lap. I smiled, remembering her habit of fidgeting. I knew she was getting ready to ask me something, so I just waited. Finally, she looked up, and despite the misery I could see in her eyes, all she said was, "Okay, Brendan. Thank you for spending today with me." I looked at her perplexed. I was sure that wasn't what she wanted to say, but I just nodded, picked up my sleepy little carapoo in my arms, and drove her home. Next chapter. The funeral was 2 days later. I stood there as the casket was lowered into the ground, holding Lark in one arm. Sophia had her other arm around my other hand, but her eyes were dry. Everyone was crying. After that, we all went back to the house and I hardly spoke to her. We all talked to the many friends and family members who had come to pay their respects, and it was a long, hard day. Sophia managed to catch me as I was putting Lark to bed. She had her own room in the big house. "Brendan, could you give me a moment before you leave? I'm sorry I'm not..." "You have nothing to apologize for. You need to be with your family. Honestly, it's okay. You go ahead and I'll talk to you later. I'm just going to sit here with Lark." This funeral brought to mind. I couldn't say it. She brought her hand up to her mouth. "Oh, Brendan, I'm so sorry. I was so wrapped up I didn't even think..." She was on the verge of tears. "Sophia, please, your father just died. You have every right to focus on that. It's okay, I promise. I'm thinking about him too." She nodded. "Are you sure? I can sit with you for a while." "Thanks, I'll be fine. I'll find you later." "Okay." She hesitated, then gave me a quick hug and left the room. I sat in the dark and looked at my sleeping daughter. I had a lot to think about. Next chapter. When Lark woke up, she was acting unusually fussy. As I said, she is usually a cheerful child. I asked if she wanted to go home and she nodded. I went over and kissed Luz on the cheek and Lark did too. I told her we would talk to her soon. I saw Sophia at the other end of the room and nodded my head toward the kitchen. She was talking to a man a few years older than us, but she quickly said something to him and immediately walked over. Who was that? I immediately regretted not being able to find the words. "I'm sorry. That was rude of me." She looked at me strangely. "Brendan, you can always ask me anything. This is our cousin Gabriel, Mom's sister's son. Muy guapo, isn't he?" She teased. I turned away, angry with myself. But strangely enough, I was touched by her words. "I just wanted to tell you that I'm coming home. That little Chanjita had a long day." "Not a monkey," she said. For a 3-year-old, she was remarkably bilingual. I was sure I should be thanking Luz. I grinned and kissed the top of her head. Then I turned to Sophia. "I'm sorry. I know you wanted to talk, but can we do it tomorrow?" "Sure. Should I call or do you want to do it yourself?" "I'll call." "Okay, and Brendan, thanks." I just nodded and Sophia added, "Bye, Angel." Lark looked at her shyly and her thumb was back in place. Next chapter. I called as promised, but Sophia said she was still tied up with her family. Her mother is exhausted, and she and her brothers are working things out. I said I understood and asked if there was anything I could do to help. She replied that there wasn't at the moment, and then paused. "Brendan, this isn't what I wanted to talk about, but I wanted you to know I'm thinking about moving back to Austin to be with my mom." "Okay, that makes sense, I guess. But you don't need my permission." "I know, but I seem to have an overwhelming need to be brutally honest with you. I don't want you to think I'm forcing anything on you. I know you and your mom are close, and she watches your daughter a lot, so I wanted to tell you that if my being around is a problem, I'll try to think of something else." "Sophia, I'm sorry. Of course, if you want to be with your mother, You should be with her. Thank you for considering my feelings. Of course there won't be a problem. Luz needs you. Thank you, Brendan. I'll call you when things get a little less hectic. She hung up. Next chapter. She called, but only to say she'd discussed things with Luz and they'd agreed, so she was going back to Waco to pack. She was a little nervous. I'm sorry, Brendan. I know I said I wanted to talk, but I didn't want you to think I was blowing you off or anything. Is this part of your new course on honesty? She sounded sad now. Not on a roll. I'm really trying to be a better person. For some reason, I was starting to get angry. Why did I feel like I had to apologize all the time? She was the one who cheated, and now she was making me feel like a jerk. It's okay, Sophia, like you said. It's your appointment, so just let me know when it's convenient for you. And I hung up. Next chapter. Sophia. I just stared at the phone. My mom looked at me. Well, girl? He hung up on me, Mom. I try to be honest, but when I think I see the old Brendan, he gets so mad. And I don't know why. Mom looked at me for a few seconds. Mia, are you still the same as you were when you were married to him? Well, no. Like you, the old Brendan is gone too. He had to go through what happened to you, then he got married and had a kid. And then his wife died. He's not the same man you married anymore. Mom took my hands in hers. You have to be patient. You have to remember that he hasn't seen you for a long time. And now you're back, and he probably has a lot of emotions to go through. Trust me, Misha. I told you I'm going to help you, so listen to me. You have to be strong right now. You have to be able to take whatever he throws at you. Can you do that? I nodded. Thank you, Mom. How did you get to be so wise? She only smiled. Give it some space, Sophia. Go back to Waco. I'll have Hector and Jamie come tomorrow with the truck. Okay, Mom? Next chapter. As it turned out, I didn't have a lot of packing to do, and I moved my life back to the old house. Hector and Jaime had rented an apartment in town, so it was just me and my mom. I hadn't started looking for a job yet, as I wanted to spend time with my mom, and we had a chance to get things back to normal. Judging by his reaction during our last conversation, I decided to wait before calling Brendan. But circumstances intervened. He called my mom and asked if she could watch Lark on Saturday. He was supposed to meet with a client, and due to a scheduling mismatch, they had to do it over the weekend. And I was sitting at the kitchen table in my robe eating breakfast when I heard a knock. Then the door opened and he walked in. I stared at him. He stared back. Then he chuckled. Sorry. I'm used to just showing up. I'll be knocking from now on. I saw him stare, and it warmed me in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I lowered my eyes, hiding my blush, and said, It's okay. I was just surprised Mom didn't tell me you were coming. I assume she's sitting for Lark today? Yeah, I asked Luz if I could do it. I have a meeting. Damn client couldn't make room during the week. Daddy, bad word, quipped Lark. Sorry, honey. I laughed. I'm sure Mom likes having her. But Brendan, I was suddenly very nervous. It's okay. If I help Mom with her? He looked at me strangely. I hurried to fill the silence. I'd be lying if I said I only wanted to help Mom. I'd actually want to get to know her better. She's a part of you. That's why she's important. I couldn't look at him for fear he'd say no. He looked at me again for a long time, sitting with Lark on his lap. He looked at her and said, Pumpkin, there's someone I want you to meet. Lark looked at me shyly as he continued. She's the sister of Tio Jaime and Tio Hector, so I guess she's your Maria Sophia. I couldn't help myself. I started to cry. Lark got off Brendan's lap and walked over to me. She held out her arms to be picked up. I sat her on my lap and she put her arms around me. Don't cry, Tia. Which of course made me cry even harder. Don't worry, Lark, they're happy tears. Brendan was smiling too, and his eyes looked suspiciously moist. Thanks, he said. I'll be back in a couple hours. Then, turning to Lark, be good for Abuela and Tia Sophia, okay? Okay, Daddy. Next chapter. We had a great time and I made some decisions. When Brendan came back from the meeting, I asked him if he would stay for lunch. He started to be reluctant, when suddenly Lark said, But Dad, Abuela promised to make empanadas. 3 kinds. Brendan dropped to his knees. Oh, well, in that case, yay. Lark clapped. Later, when Lark had already started to doze off, Brendan started to leave again. Well, I have to take her home. Actually, Brendan, unless you have other plans, do you mind if we talk? You can put her to bed here and... I blanched. Okay, Sophia, it's fine. I don't have anywhere to go. Next chapter. He fiddled with Lark, but with a tummy full of Mommy's empanadas, she soon fell off. We settled into the chairs, and he looked at me expectantly. Brendan, first I wanted to say that I'm really sorry about Carrie. I know I never met her, but Mom and Dad loved her. She made you happy and gave you Lark, so I know I would have loved her too. I hope you'll tell me about her someday. Thank you, was all he said. I took a deep breath. Remember when you asked about Gabriella and I said you could always ask me anything? He nodded. Okay. I just wanted to remind you. Anyway, another deep breath. This is going to be difficult, I'm sure. I'd like to explain everything, both to myself and to you. First of all, I'm not the same person I used to be. I have to tell you that I've been seeing a therapist, and she's helped me a lot. To realize what kind of person I was and why I did what I did. I'm so ashamed of that person. The one you saw in that hallway. So very ashamed. I'm sorry. I promised myself I wouldn't cry. Brendan didn't say a word. He just let me speak my mind. And then, in the parking lot and at the house, that conversation is imprinted on my brain, now that I think back. I realize I must have looked like an idiot. Everything I said was bullshit. I didn't give you one good reason. I was just making up excuses. Even later, when we met for the last time and I tried again to explain how everything had happened, it was still complete nonsense. Of course, I believed it at the time, but looking back, it's like someone else was saying all that crap. I'm so sorry, Brendan. You must have thought I was like that. It wasn't that I was crying, but I couldn't hold back the tears. I'm sorry. I took a deep breath and continued. I guess I can do that now, if that's what you want to hear. Explain it, I mean. And since I'm trying to be as honest with you as I can, I'd like to try. Like I said, it's as much for me as it is for you. I'm sorry if it's selfish. Brendan looked at me for a long moment. His eyes read confusion. He said, It's all water under the bridge, but if it helps you, I'm willing to listen. Okay, thanks. I snorted and tried to pull myself together. Honestly, the Sophia you married was a spoiled princess, plain and simple. Everyone always gave me everything I wanted, and I always felt in charge. I did what I wanted and when I wanted. I was in control. Until I met you. With you, I no longer felt like the master of the situation. You saw right through me in a way that no one had ever seen before. When we made love, it was like nothing I'd ever felt before. I know you're the only person I've ever made love to. At first, what we had was exciting and unusual, and I fell in love with you. It should have been wonderful, but for some reason I started to get scared. I know it doesn't make sense, but you were right about what you said that night. I panicked. I guess I wanted to get caught to justify my escape, because that's exactly what I did. A spoiled little girl who ran away because she couldn't handle real feelings. It was easy with Ray. With him, I was in control. I never loved him, but he was safe? No, that's not right. He was harmless, unremarkable. That's why I never had the feelings I had with you. With you, I felt like something was taking over me. I felt outside of myself, like a leaf in a tornado. Looking back, I realize it was amazing, but at the time I was too shallow, selfish, and fearful to realize it. I hope it makes some sense. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted. I felt like I'd run a marathon, but I continued. Now, please, I'd like to answer anything you want to ask me. Brendan thought for a long moment, then said, I have to think about what you've told me. If we had talked like this back then, we might have been able to overcome everything. But, realizing what you're getting at, I think I can accept the fact that the person you are now wouldn't have done such things then. And that being said, I know we've already broken up, but how could you go back to him? It destroyed all hope of us ever getting back together, no matter how slim the chances were. I was shocked. Who told you I moved in with him? Oh my God, yes, I went to see him. But not to get him back. He kept calling me, so I went to tell him to his face to leave me alone. And you know what happened? I started to giggle. Brendan shook his head, looking confused. I went over to his place and pounded on the door as hard as I could. It took a while, but eventually he opened the door, and he was only wearing pants, and he'd clearly just... Well, anyway, I started to tell him what I wanted to say when suddenly I heard a voice from the other room. I'm sorry, but I just couldn't help myself. Not that it mattered, but it was still the same old me. I squeezed past him to see who it was. When I saw it, I just started laughing and walked out. I swear that was the last time I saw him. He said, I must be as bad as you because now I have to know too. Who was that? I smiled. His damn cousin Inez. He stared at me. Really? I nodded, just laughing. Brendan shook his head, then made a thoughtful look. I saw his eyes widen. Then he surprised me. I owe you an apology, Sophia. I remembered. How I found out about you and Ray. It was another project of Ray's company, and I overheard the two guys talking. I bet he started that rumor himself to get back at us. I felt my anger start to build. Hijo de puta. Brendan nodded and said, I'm sorry. I believed that shit and got even more pissed off at you. I know it was over between us by then, but I'm glad I know now that it wasn't true. Thank you for that. I'm angry for what he took away from us with his lies, but realistically, I realized there was no chance of reconciliation back then. Brendan, I am fully responsible for my actions. You asked me what I regretted that night, and I didn't have an answer. Well, now I know. I regret cheating on you and hurting you. I'm sorry for ruining us. I was scared and selfish and childish, and I handled it in the worst way possible. I would do anything to take it all back, but honestly, if I had gone back to that man, I'd probably find another way to screw it up. Brendan's next question was very interesting. So what's different now if, and let me emphasize this hypothetically, if we started dating again, you wouldn't be scared again? I thought for a moment. That was really the gist of what I wanted to say to him. So I looked him in the eye, and with all the love I still held for him, I said, all I can say, and I hope I get a chance to prove it to you, is that I'm not that person anymore. I've mentioned before that I've been in touch with one person, a therapist, who has helped me a lot. If you want to talk to her, I will give her permission to tell you anything you want to know. You can trust her honesty, and you'll be assured that I'm not trying to twist things. I would never do that, Brendan. Never. I know I ruined our relationship with my actions, and for the rest of my life I will feel pain and regret for what I did and for hurting you. I will never do anything to intentionally jeopardize what we could have rebuilt, no matter how fragile it may be. I can't promise I'll never do anything to make you angry. No one can promise that. I'd just like a chance to see if we can be friends. Just like that. I wiped away more tears. I'm sorry. I'm not very good at not crying. I just miss my friend. Please just think about it. I kissed him on the cheek and left the room. I went to my mom and we talked. I told her that I wanted Brendan to have time to think about what I said, and I gave him space. That I realized that now I needed to let him control everything that was going to happen between us on his own. She smiled. You're learning, sweetheart. Next chapter. Brendan. I didn't see Luz or Sophia when I packed up Lark and headed home. I appreciated the space. As I drove, I pondered what she had told me. She had certainly given me a lot of food for thought. It was obvious that she had matured since our divorce. The question was, would I be able to love this new Sophia? She said she still loved me, and God willing, I believed her. Then I realized it wasn't about love. It was about trust. Would I be able to trust her again? She made an impression on me, and she said she missed her friend. I wasn't a complete idiot. I knew she was hoping for more. So was I ready to give her what she wanted? I realized that was the question I should have asked. With Sophia's newfound honesty, well, newfound for me, what would she say if I asked her if she could be satisfied with friendship? And that's when I realized that of course I needed to see her again. Next chapter. I called her the next day and apologized for leaving without saying goodbye to her and Luz. I asked her to tell her mother that, and she said it was okay and she would. I thanked her for everything she had told me and told her that I had a lot to think about and that I would talk to her again. She took that without comment, just said I was always welcome, and thanked me for listening to her. Next chapter. Sophia. As I promised my mom, I gave Brendan his freedom. I went on a job search and asked Brendan if he had any opinions on which firms had the best reputations. He sent me a list with a few names, and one of them invited me for an interview. I got the job and sent him a text thanking him. He sent me a short congratulations and a thumbs up emoticon. I spent a lot of time with my mom just talking and, surprisingly, cooking. I never had any interest in it during my princess phase, as I was starting to call that period of my life, and mostly ate takeout or microwave meals in Waco. Most of my free time in Waco was spent at the gym or in classes that seemed interesting to me. Once in a while I would go out with friends from work, but I didn't go on dates. After what I had done, men just weren't interested in me. I was hit on, of course, but I compared them all to Brendan, and none of them even came close. Anyway, my mom was a great cook, and I suddenly wanted to learn. We spent a lot of time in her kitchen, and my brothers had the upper hand. They lived in the city now, but they came to visit us often, and I was grateful to be able to reestablish that brotherly bond. The three of us, my brothers and I, Got together a few times at Kathy Elder's, Brendan's favorite bar. The first time I went there, I asked Jason, the owner and bartender, and Brendan's best friend, if I could talk to him in his office. He looked at me for a few seconds and then agreed. I first apologized for hurting his friend and for acting the way I did. I told him that I was no longer that person, that I had talked to Brendan and apologized to him, and we were exploring the possibility of remaining friends. I told him that if he didn't want me here, I would leave, but that I just wanted to clear the air about their friendship. He was the best man at our wedding. He just looked at me and said, "If Brendan's cool, I'm cool. Look up the word laconic in the dictionary, and there will be a picture of Jason. How he survived working behind the bar, I have no idea." I asked if Brendan was playing there, and he said no, not since Carrie died. That made me inexplicably sad. I thanked him and almost ran out before he saw me crying. Next chapter. A few weeks later, Brendan called again and said he had another Saturday night meeting. He said it was the same damn guy as last time, and I laughed when I heard Lark yelling, "Bad word, Daddy," in the background. He asked if we could watch Lark for the morning. I choked up a little when I heard "we," but replied that, of course. Then I was shocked to hear him add, "And then maybe the two of us can spend the day together? If it's okay with Mom?" I loved that he still called my mom, Mom. I tried to hold back my suddenly racing heart and replied, "I'd love to. I'll ask her and let you know." I told my mom about it and she just smiled and said, "That might be difficult, honey. I think he's ready to tell you about everything that happened afterward. You have to be ready and be strong." Too nervous to talk to him, I just texted that Mom was thrilled that Lark had stayed with her all day. I figured I might as well ask what he had planned when he dropped her off. Next chapter. Brendan. I dropped Lark off with Luz and Sophia. She made coffee and after taking a sip, I smiled and said, "Mama Luz, you always made the best coffee." She grinned and shifted her gaze to Sophia, who was smiling shyly. "You?" She nodded and said, "Nothing special, it's just coffee." "But still," I said, "as good as Mom's." Then Sophia was thinking about something. "Oh, what shall I wear? Should I bring anything with me?" "No, nothing. Just casual clothes. I wasn't planning anything special. I just thought we could continue our conversation from last time. You guys talked a lot, and I've had time to think about it. Besides, I should probably tell you something. I thought we could go to the park again and just sit and chat." Sophia nodded, and I headed off to the meeting. As I was leaving, I thought I heard Luz say, "Te lo dije, mija." Next chapter. I returned to the house a couple hours later. Sophia was waiting for me in jeans and a simple white blouse unbuttoned over a teal tank top. She had a picnic basket with her. "And I know you asked me not to bring anything with me, but when you mentioned the park," she shrugged sweetly. "No, that's great. I wasn't thinking. I'm glad one of us was." "Lark?" he called out. She ran into the house, Luz following more sedately. "Here I am, Daddy." I scooped her up in my arms and stroked her neck as she squealed. "Aunt Sophia and I are going out for a while. Can you stay here and be good for Abuela?" "Sí," she nodded. I tickled her and she giggled. Next chapter? We walked over to the spot that had become our place and just relaxed for a few minutes, enjoying the beautiful day. We chatted silently for a while. Finally, I said, "You asked me once if I would tell you about Carrie. I'd like to tell you now if you don't mind." Sophia nodded. "Yeah, I'd like to. But you know, this bench is pretty hard. My butt is still sore from last time. Why don't we just stretch out on the blanket?" I threw her a, "I know you're up to something" look and she smirked. "No, nothing like that. Here, lie down." I did. But instead of lying down next to me, she lay down so that her feet were facing the opposite direction and her head was next to mine, her hair touching my shoulder. "There, now we can talk in peace," she explained. "Before I tell you about Carrie, I wanted to thank you for giving me the time and opportunity to think about what you said the last time we were here. It helped clear up a lot of unresolved issues, but I think I have a lot to think about as well. I just wanted to tell you about it first. And maybe after you hear my story, we can decide where to go from here." Sophia thought, "Mom, thank you for being so wise. It's time to be strong." But she simply replied, "Of course. Some of this might be a little hard to hear, but I promise I'm not trying to be cruel. I just want you to know what I've been through." She nodded. Next chapter. I guess I should start from the last time I saw you. That day, 5.5 years ago, I walked out of my lawyer's office in a daze. I got in my car and just drove. When I finally looked up, I found myself outside Kathy Elder's house. I walked inside, and Jason took one look at me and placed a bottle and glass in front of me. Then he held out his hand. I handed him my keys and poured. I woke up at home, still in my clothes, with a trash can, a bottle of aspirin, and a bottle of water next to my bed. There was a note from Jason lying there. Call me when you come back to life. I swallowed 4 aspirin pills, chugged them down with water, and crawled back under the covers. After that, I poured all the booze in the house, apologized to Jeff for missing work, and tried to figure out how to move on with my life. I dove headfirst into work, and when I wasn't working, I went to the gym. I went to 2. One where I did aerobics, weight machines and stuff, and one where I did boxing, where I sparred a bit. I kept going, but I probably shouldn't have. I almost hurt someone. I remember feeling furious, and the next thing I knew I was being grabbed by 2 coaches. Of course I felt terrible and apologized to the guy, but they kicked me out for 6 months and told me to get a grip. The week after that, Jeff told me pretty much the same thing. He made me take 2 weeks of vacation. I went to Lake Travis and looked at the water during the day and the stars at night, and after 2 weeks of that vacation, I came home and started slowly picking up the pieces. I think it was about 6 months after I last saw you. I know that doesn't seem like a long time, but it was like a miracle. I have to go back even further to explain why. Sophia, I was a real nerd in high school, and Carrie was my best friend. I had a lifelong crush on her, and I finally got up the courage to ask her out my senior year of high school. We were each other's first. We were in love. But for various reasons, I had to leave home and ended up here. So when I heard her singing at the bar that night, well, that's why I said it was like a miracle. I mean, she had a perfectly good reason for being there. But in that moment, for me, she just appeared. And from that moment on, she helped me start to really recover. 6 months after that, we got married. The next thing I knew, I came home and saw her crying. I panicked, of course, but she just pointed to something on the table. I looked, and it was a test kit. I just stared at her. She was still crying, but she was also smiling and nodding. So, Lark was born about a year and a half after we were married. We were very, very happy, and that's when I felt like I could forgive you. And then she was gone. Silent tears as I remembered. Lark was 18 months old. I remember I was at home trying to put her to bed and waiting for Carrie to come home from the store. I offered to go with her, but Lark was a little cranky and she asked me to stay home with her. Tears again. I remember ringing the doorbell and being angry that it woke Lark up after I finally put her down. I opened the door and was surprised to see 2 policemen. They asked who I was and I told them. They asked if my wife's name was Carrie Barnes, and I answered in the affirmative. Then they said that they were sorry. I sat up and hid my face in my palms. I'm sorry, Sophia. I don't know why this is hitting me so hard. She stood up as I stood up and came over to sit next to me and just hugged me. I got angry. That was so damn stupid. She stopped for gas and went inside to get something. There was this stoned junkie who was robbing the place, and when she opened the door, he freaked out and shot her. Sophia clutched me tightly to her, as the senselessness of it all threatened to overwhelm me. If she hadn't needed gas, if she hadn't decided to go inside, if I had gone with her, some brat took my wife and my daughter's mother for a couple bucks. I buried my face in her shoulder. She hugged me for a long time. Finally, I pulled myself together. Thank God there's Luz and Miguel and your brothers. Even after, us, they became the family I haven't had since my mother died. Luz was great, took care of Larka. And Miguel. He was a shoulder to lean on in my darkest moments. But I knew Lark needed me, and she, like your family, helped me through it. I think you'd like her. Carrie, I mean. She loved your family as much as I did. I lay back down and Sophia returned to her previous position. I guess that's it. So I'm going to make the same offer you did. Please ask me anything you want to ask me. She hesitated. First, I want to thank you for sharing with me. I know it's been hard. I mean, I knew I was hurting, but to hear you express it just now, I think I finally realized how much I hurt you. I heard her snort. I reached out and stroked her shoulder. She reached out and held my hand briefly. I know I've said this before, but I can't tell you how sorry I am that you lost Carrie. When Mom and Dad talked about her, I couldn't be jealous, even though I tried at first. It was obvious that they cared about her, but I was old enough to realize that it was in addition to, not instead of, someone else. The old Sophia wouldn't have been able to understand that, she added softly. Thank you, was all I could say. I wanted to tell you that I went to talk to Jason a while ago. He's your best friend, and I just tried to apologize, to tell him that I've changed and that we're starting to connect again. He's very important to you, and I wanted him to be okay with me being around. He's a good guy. Sometimes I feel like I don't deserve his friendship. Sophia replied sadly. I know what you mean. Anyway, he told me that you stopped playing? I guess it has to do with Carrie. I sighed. I didn't quit at all. I'm still playing for Lark. I just can't play in public anymore. I told you that when I found her again, it was in a bar and she was singing karaoke, right? Sophia nodded. Well, I didn't tell you she was really good. We played in a band in high school and she was the best we had. If the others didn't suck so bad, we could make money off of it. After we reunited, she actually sang with us at some shows until Lark came along. But after she left, it was too painful to go back to performing without her. Maybe someday. I paused, remembering. Want to hear something corny? We sang our wedding vows to each other. Oh, that's not corny. Did you do something original? No, we really liked the song Live Forever, the Little Big Town Band's version. One of the guys in the band helped with the arrangement, and that's what we sang. I can carry a tune, Sophia moaned, but it was amazing. But now, there's a line in the song that haunts me. I hummed it to Sophia. And if we don't die young, we might live forever. For a while, we lay like that, just breathing. Sophia, I started and turned to her. She turned at the same time and we bumped heads. She started laughing and exclaimed, Oh, you fool. She wrinkled her nose and smiled and rubbed her head, and for some reason I just rolled over to her and kissed the spot where I hit. She froze, eyes wide and staring at me. With a suddenly dry mouth, I smiled weakly and said, There, that's better, and sat up. Then, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. She reached out and held her hand for a second. It's okay. Next chapter. When we got back, it was late, so Lark and I stayed for dinner. Abuela is making chila. Chila. What's that, Abuela? Chilaquiles, mi cielo. Yes, that and tres leches, informed me Lark. Oh, well, in that case. Yay. Next chapter. Sophia. I had never insisted. But after our long conversations, I noticed a change in Brendan. He became more open. When he finally asked if I wanted to have dinner with him, I said I really did. Then I ran to hug my mom and cry. And I had so many butterflies I thought I was going to fly away. I changed outfits 6 times. Mom just shook her head. Mia, it's Brendan. Don't worry. I know, Mom, I'm just so nervous. She stroked my cheek. It's going to be okay. And it was. Even better than okay. When he arrived, he had a small bouquet of flowers, and my eyes lit up. He grinned as he handed them to my mom and kissed her cheek. I put my hands on my hips and pretended to hum. They both laughed, and I couldn't help but join in. Just like that, my nerves were gone. Had he really known how I would feel and figured out a way to break the ice, so to speak, without me noticing? There was more depth to him than I remembered. Come on, Casanova, let's go. I kissed my mom too, and we hit the road. As we drove, I asked, Where's Lark? Oh, I thought I was taking advantage of Luz, so I asked one of the neighborhood girls to watch her. She's a good kid, and she could use the money. Lark likes her. Oh, good. So where are you taking me? I thought the Italian one? Oh, that sounds great, actually. He took me to a small establishment I'd never been to before. The food was excellent, and we shared a bottle of Chianti. We talked, he made me laugh, and I felt so at ease with him. Afterwards, we took a walk along the river. We held hands and just enjoyed each other. It's funny, you know when you can be happy spending time with someone and you don't have to talk? That's what happened. He drove me home and kissed me on the cheek. I think I was floating inside. It was the perfect first date. We didn't rush things. Sometimes we went to the movies or out to dinner. We went to Kathy Elder's and saw Brendan's old band play, which was a lot of fun. The lead singer noticed him and asked the crowd to give him a hand. We took a spot in the park and had a couple nice picnics. He asked me to dance, and it was the best date ever. I laughed at his dance moves, but he didn't mind, especially the slow songs. Several times, men came up to me and asked if they could dance with me. Brendan looked at me, and I just shook my head each time. He said, It's okay if you want to, but since we are open and honest with each other, I don't think I would like it if you danced to slow songs. I smiled and replied, The only guy I want to dance with is sitting right in front of me. He never pushed for intimacy, and to be honest, I was starting to get a little nervous. That night after our dance date, he reached up to kiss my cheek again. I took his head in both hands, turned his face toward me, and kissed him on the lips. He flinched in surprise, but only for a moment. I heard him make some kind of sound, deep in his throat, and then his arms came around me. I wrapped my arms around his neck, and I think we'd still be there if Mom hadn't turned on the porch light. We both burst into laughter. Brendan yelled, "Good night, Mom!" Then to me, "Thank you, Sophia. That was unexpected." I smiled. I felt like we had taken a huge step forward, but I didn't know that life was about to test us. Next chapter. Brendan. One day, Jeff invited me to lunch, and you can't say no to your boss. Not that I said no. We had grown close over the years, and he was a mentor to me. Lunch with him was not unusual. This time, we were greeted by his wife. "Thanks for joining us, Brendan. Listen, I have a favor to ask of you." It was Jeff. He never liked to give orders. He always phrased the request. "Listen, we have a meeting with one of our suppliers next week, and as a goodwill gesture, I said we'd come see them. It's in Dallas. I'm sorry, Brendan. Normally I would have handled this myself, but it's our anniversary and Karen will have kittens if I miss it. Can I count on you?" "Sure, no problem. And by the way, congratulations. How many is the total?" 33 years of wedded bliss." He grinned at his wife. "Hard to believe. Hell, you married her when she was in elementary school?" I laughed. Karen blushed and slapped my hand. Jeff laughed and hugged her. Almost. Next chapter. I dropped Lark off to leave her with Luz the afternoon before the trip. Sophia was still at work, so I just told Luz I'd be back late the next night if that was okay with her. I made the 3-hour drive to Dallas, checked into a hotel, then went down to a restaurant and had a quick bite to eat. I went back upstairs and called Sophia. "Hey, how's it going up there? Is Lark behaving himself?" "Of course, you know she's an angel for Mom. Do you want to talk to her?" "Sure." Lark chattered happily about what she and Abuela were doing, then handed the phone back to Sophia. We talked for another minute, made tentative plans for the weekend, and said goodnight to each other. As I had feared, it had been a long day with several different people involved. We worked until almost 7, deciding that it was better to finish things than wait for the next day. But eventually we finished, and by the time I checked out, grabbed a bite to eat, and drove home, it was almost 8 o'clock. I called Luz and let her know I was on my way. She offered to keep Lark at her place for one more night, but I told her I missed my baby girl and would come get her. By the time I pulled up to the house, it was past 11. Sophia wasn't home, which was odd. Luz just said she needed to go out. The house has a circular driveway, so you can pull in on one side and then just pull out the other without backing up or turning around. I was just putting sleepy Lark in her car seat and getting into the driver's seat when I saw another car pull up behind me. The car door opened, and in the glow of the interior light, I saw Sophia. She leaned over and hugged the driver. Everything clenched into a lump. I couldn't realize what I was seeing. She got out of the car and noticed my vehicle. She smiled at me and waved. She had just gotten home with another guy and she was already smiling at me? I slammed the door and drove off. I watched as she lowered her hand and her expression changed to confused. Then she covered her mouth with her hand and ran down the road. My phone rang a minute later, but I just turned it off. I didn't feel like it the next day, of course, but I had to stop by the office to report to Jeff about yesterday's meeting and give him the copies of the contracts I'd brought. He could tell something was bothering me, but he left it at that. I went back to my office and sank into my chair. There were several voicemails on my office phone, as well as a message from the receptionist that Sophia had called her 3 times, saying she was upset and asking me to call her. I ignored all of that, until my office door opened and Luz walked in. I was stunned. She had never been in my office before. Sherry, my secretary, stood behind her back and apologized. "I'm sorry, Mr. Barnes. I told her you couldn't be disturbed, but—" "It's all right, Sherry." Luz was dressed in her Sunday clothes. I stood up and asked if she wanted coffee or anything else. She just looked at me with an unreadable expression on her face. "Brendan, you've been like a son to me ever since you and Sophia got married. Even after that, you've always been a part of my family. But now, I'm very disappointed in you. Sophia is crying at home because she knows what you think of what she did. But you didn't have the respect to give her a chance to explain. You just ran away like a little boy. But I saw her with that man. She was so dressed up," I said in desperation. "You saw what you wanted to see, and that's why I'm so disappointed. Now think about what I said, and then I expect you for dinner tonight. Don't be late." And she turned and walked away. At exactly 6:30, I knocked on her door. Luz opened the door, took Lark's hand, and led her inside. As we passed the kitchen, she pointed to a chair and said, "Siéntate." I sat down. Luz proceeded to lead Lark into another room. After a few minutes, Sophia came in and sat down across from me. Her eyes were red, but otherwise she looked calm. She said, "Brendan, I know what you think you saw. I want to tell you what happened. Then I'll need to tell you something else. Please let me finish," she added as I started to speak. "First, I owe you an apology. I should have called you, but it happened so fast, and I knew you were in meetings all day. So it's on my conscience. I could have left you a message, but I didn't communicate, and if I had, it wouldn't have happened. Anyway, when I got to work that morning, my boss told me that there was going to be a social event that evening, and the person who was supposed to represent the company was sick. I don't know. Something out of the blue, but both he and his wife got sick and couldn't attend. So he asked. But he was actually telling me that I should go in their place. He asked if I could make a date on short notice, and normally I would have asked you to come, but you were in Dallas. I told him that, and he asked if there was anyone else in the office I could invite as an escort. She paused and took a sip of her drink. I thought about it and said Fred Pear would suit me. He's another one of the realtors and very experienced, and very married. She looked at me. And before you ask, I was wondering why he didn't just send Fred and his wife. My boss said that when the original couple had to back out, he decided he wanted to give me the opportunity. Events like this are a good way to network and become better known. The fact that he invited me means he's probably preparing me for a bigger role in the company. Anyway, he said it was fine and said he'd talk to Fred. Fred was fine with going, and we coordinated our schedules. He told me I lived down the road and offered to pick me up and drive me. We went and had a good time, but we were there to socialize, and that's what we did. You saw him dropping me off. That's the reality of it. A work event with a coworker who was the perfect gentleman. She just looked at me. Sophia, I'm so sorry, I overreacted. Yes, you did. And then you ignored me. You didn't even give me a chance. She was crying now, and I felt even worse than the night before. You're right. You're right. I was an asshole, and you didn't deserve it. I can only apologize and ask you to forgive me. I remembered what had happened 5 years ago, and the irony hit me in the balls. She snorted and wiped her eyes. I don't know, Brendan, I really don't. And here's why. Okay, we both screwed up, but my mistake was in not communicating with you. And your mistake was not trusting me. I know maybe you had a gut reaction, but that just shows that you still haven't forgiven me. You said you had forgiven me, but now I don't know. Brendan, she paused, inhaled and exhaled. Brendan, I know I said I wanted us to be friends again, and I'd be happy about that. But I lied. God help me, I lied. I can't just be your friend. I love you, and it's killing me to tiptoe around each other. I want you back. All the way to the end. There, I said it. She sighed heavily. I said it, and I'm glad I finally did. I just stared at her. She reached out and took my hands in hers. But if you can't trust me, then there's no point. I thought I got through to you when I promised I'd never hurt you again, and that you believed me when I told you I'd changed. I started to say that I believed her, but the words froze in my mouth. Obviously, I was still in trouble. If you can't trust me, if you can't get past our past, then we can't start anything new. And you have to let me go. You have to make a decision, Brendan. I love you, and I always will. But it's up to you now. She leaned back in her chair, exhausted. Tears streamed down my face. Sophia, again, please believe me when I say I'm sorry for running away like that. I honestly thought we were making progress. I have begun to love you again. I know I was cautious, but I don't regret anything. But obviously my reaction, I still have some issues. I thought for a moment. Can I make you a promise? She nodded. So, you told me you found someone to talk to, and it helped. I think maybe it did for me, too. Talk to someone, I mean. You suggested I talk to your therapist? Are you still okay with that? I don't want to ask anything about you. I'm wondering if knowing your story will help her help me. Well, if it's okay with you, here's my promise. Can you give me a month? It's up to you whether we see each other or not. But in a month, I think I can give you an answer. Next chapter. I took the month and spent a lot of time talking to Dr. Morgan. Sophia said she loved me, but decided we should spend that time apart, and I agreed. At the end of the month, I returned to the house. Lark ran inside screaming, Abuela, Tia Sophia, I missed you. Luz scooped her up in his arms and moaned, Dios mío, you're getting so big! But she kissed Lark on the cheek and, throwing me a meaningful look, carried her away. Sophia looked at me, smiling uncertainly. I took a step toward her, then 2 more long steps, and wrapped my arms around her. I missed you too, I whispered. She turned her face to mine and I kissed her. Next chapter. Of course, not everything was so rosy. There were things that threw us off balance, but we knew what we needed to pay attention to, and we always talked things through. But overall, we gradually grew closer. When we finally made love for the first time after such a long break, it was everything I remembered, and more. We had both grown up, and the combination of new and familiar was extraordinary. Afterward, she clung to me and cried. Concerned, I asked what was wrong. Nothing. Happy tears. She snorted, snuggling closer to me. It wasn't that long ago that I didn't think I'd ever see you again, and now, I've wanted this for so long, baby. I love you so much. We fell asleep in each other's arms. Next chapter. The wedding was much smaller this time, but we didn't care. Luz cried, Jason pretended not to cry, and Jeff and Karen just sat there glowing. There weren't a lot of family and friends. I called Carrie's mom to let her know, and she cried too, but wished me happiness. Carrie would want that for you, Brendan. I invited her to come see her granddaughter, and she promised she would. Then the ceremony began. Lark was having a lot of fun, bouncing around the stage, throwing flower petals everywhere. She got to the altar and rushed to me. Here, Daddy, she whispered, and held out the rings to me. Thank you, sweetheart, I whispered back. Go sit with Abuela, okay? She nodded and ran to Luz. Then I turned to look down the aisle. She was just as stunning as she was the first time, walking towards me under the arm of her brothers. They handed her to me, grinning. They both kissed their sister on the cheek, and Hector poked me in the shoulder. It's about time, brother, he said. We turned to face each other. Well, here we meet, I muttered. She only smiled. Next chapter. The reception was winding down, and Sophia and I did a slow dance. I was holding Lark in my arms. She had one small hand on each of our shoulders and smiled. She looked at Sophia. I don't know Mommy very well because I was just a little girl, but Daddy said she watches over us from heaven. She turned to me. So when I go to heaven too, she'll be my mom again? I nodded, tears in my eyes. Yes, honey, she'll always be your mom. Good, that's good. She nodded. Then she looked at my new wife. But, are you still my Tia now? Her small eyebrows were drawn together as she pondered. Sophia looked at me, perplexed. I only looked away and shrugged. Good luck, I whispered in her ear, and she stepped on my foot. But before she could respond, my daughter came to a decision. I guess you're my mom, Sophia, now. And so it went. A few months later, we found out that Lark is about to have a little brother. We're going to name him Miguel. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.